People don't laugh out loud a lot. They just smile. So I'm so egocentric that I don't even listen for the laugh. I'm laughing inside, and that's all that matters. Okay, so this guy is
looking happier.
Yeah. So again, we're talking about general patterns. There's no one thing that's going to tell you which leg the person prefers to stand on than the other. You getting that? But there's lots of, there's all these different things that we're talking about that you can look at, and it's when the majority of them kind of point to one leg being the standing leg, but there'll always be a few contradictory things. Have you noticed that? It's very rare that you'll see the whole pattern where everything about the person says, yeah, this is my standing leg. Couldn't pick it today. Yeah, really. And this is my experience too. Sometimes it's really hard to pick. Maybe that's, I don't know, whatever. It's changing. It's changeable. It's, in the technical languages, it's labile. Labile means it's changeable for no special reason. Okay, so looking at this chap. So now we can observe some clues that might tell us about standing legs versus gesturing legs, or the less preferred standing leg, if you like, or the kicking leg, or the pointing leg, or however all those different kinds of ways of describing it. What, in the way this person is lying on the floor, might suggest the tendency towards having a fairly dominant standing leg. Yeah, the angle of the foot. So that's a possibility that it could be this. Now, actually, I mean, this is the way the skeleton did lie down. I kind of went, oh, that's really interesting. And I left this leg up to correct it. I just went like that again, correct it. And this one. So there's something about the way he is. And I'm not being, it is a he, I think, from that little pelvis. That it's meaning, now, the other massive asymmetry is, of course, that arm's turned out and his chest is really, it's not very nice to look at from here because it's, however, you work with people who, that's how they are. And they're doing a great job. So, but I just aesthetically, no. I can't. So this is physio. This is physio. Feldenkrais is something else. It won't. Oh, I see what's happened.
Oh, it's come out. It's out of his.
Yeah.
Oh, nicely done.
Bit of a thoracic screw there. That's a physio joke. It's a manipulation called a thoracic screw. Yeah, like that. He's still a little bit asymmetrical, but that's just fine. All right, but it kind of makes sense actually that he's got that flare there, because now the other thing that you can do is look, and if I look along the length of his spine, along the length of his legs, and into his spine, where is his head more likely to be oriented? And I've got this line here, and then I've got this line here, which is there's not aesthetically a line that's so obvious for me here as here. I can't tell you actually. What I'm looking for is an aesthetic of a line.
Oh, so a line along.
Yeah, a sense of lines converging so that this foot feels more connected in a linear way with his head than this foot. And I'm sorry to say I can't be more articulate than that. It's an aesthetic. Yep. Okay, so you can look there, and then you can do what Philip is doing, which is look from the head. Is there an aesthetic? Yeah.
That way. His pelvis spins that way. So that leg is
Yeah. There's a lot of confusing things that could be somewhat contradictory. So if you had to say that one foot was more underneath the head than the other. Manipulations notwithstanding. Yeah. Yeah, and then his pelvis is asymmetrical. So his pelvis is a bit of a mess as well. However, let's take a little moment to look at this idea that I was trying to convey verbally, but it's such an incredibly kinesthetic possibility of the beautiful dome of the femur. It's such a beautiful dome, ball with the dome over the top. So it's like an egg, but with the egg cup over the top as opposed to the egg in the egg cup. Yep. Or whatever image you like. And I invited you to get a sense of that. What's the experience of that hipness? What's the hypnicity of it in standing? Which is really hard because there's so much neurologically going on around the hip. And it's why FI is where the muscles start to go a bit quiet around the hip joint, so people can actually feel more around there instead of this kind of habitual. Are so powerful. It's why the pelvic clock is so powerful, because those muscles start to let go a bit, and as they let go a bit, they can sense more because they're not like that. And then the hip joint gets more sense of freedom. And hey, that's, you've all felt that after the pelvic clock lessons, haven't you? I mean, you can obviously it has an impact on the spine and the head and everything else. However, that kind of African walk thing that happens after pelvic clock, classically, not everybody, but classically, is this freedom in the hip joint, because all of these little tiny muscles that are actually all dynamic stabilizers around the hip, all these little funny, there's a whole bunch of them at the front and the back, really close into the joint. And they work bloody hard on a lot of people. So we're thinking about that. When they go quiet, you can actually get a sense of the hip joint. Now, you're faking it. If you can feel the top of your pelvis there aren't any receptors in the bones to feel it. So we are faking this. This is a simulation. And it's part of adding to the self-image, which we'll talk about later. I keep saying we're going to talk about later, but obviously I'm talking about it now. We're creating something in our imagination that we can't actually sense. We can't sense our hip joint. So it's a conceit, but that's absolutely fine, because the whole the body image is a simulation anyway. So why not put some imaginary stuff into it? Because all the other stuff about it's imaginary. Like, we imagine that we're fatter or thinner than we are, or we've got a big nose or a little nose. All of that's fake as well. So why not add more into it that's actually based in something else? Anyway. So get that sense. Have a look at here and look and see how the pelvis does sit. Now for this dude, I can take it out and see. You can see this is the weight-bearing part of the hip and how solid he is. If I weight bear there and get through the leg, I can find it through the heel.
Oh, I should get this an offset.
Yes, there is an offset. And the bone responds to the weight-bearing lines, and so all the sort of crisscrossy patterns and structure in here is so beautifully engineered. Now see, I'm now pushing down through his foot from the top. So imagine that my curve of my fingers is this curve here. Whoops. And if I find just that point, the force transmits all the way down into the heel. See how now his knee will buckle a little bit because he hasn't got quads and hams. If I get it just right there, see how the force transmits straight down without buckling. So in a way, then if you stacked up the pelvis and the spine and the ribs and everything else and push down from here, you can push down through all of these links in the chain and it will go straight down into the foot. And that's what you were doing. Yeah. No, you don't. And it's almost like a contradiction, because the only way that I can get the force to transmit is for his knees to lock a little bit, because he doesn't have the muscles. And we'll go into that distinction a bit more there. I just needed to see how this lines up, and then I can push through again. Whoops, there. So that's that. So now you've been feeling the weight coming down from above, from the weight of the HAT, the head, arms, trunk. And you've been feeling that on yourself, and you've been looking at each other and seeing this kind of line. Ask your person to lie down on the floor and have a look at these kinds of things that you could look at from the top and from underneath, and the turning out and all this sort of stuff. You can look again at the idea of the 2 points of the hip joint and the 2 points of the shoulder, and whether they are, like you did in standing, and whether they are in line with each other, sort of, or whether the shoulder is over here and the pelvis is here, or whether they're, and that's the kind of line aesthetic that I'm talking about a little bit. Any rotations and this and that and the other. Knowing, of course, when you're looking at somebody, that the hip joint is inland. It's not, so people are asking me where the hip joint is, and I say, well, find the greater trochanter, and then you go inland and it's there. The hip joint is actually in here. It's inner, because of this, as Ramon said, this offset. So the greater trochanter, which is the widest part that you can feel on people, the hip joint is actually well inland of that. It's not out here on the surface. It's underneath you. There's a few reasons for it, but this is a little lever arm. That means that the glutes here can lever on this lever arm, and it gives, by having this angled out, you get more torque. So it's actually a biomechanical reason. But it comes at a bit of a cost. There's a reason why people break here, because it does mean that this is a bit vulnerable. But if we didn't have a trochanter and it was straight, this glute would be much weaker, because it doesn't have as big a... we wouldn't be as stable in a bizarre way. So there's a reason, a biomechanical reason. Okay, so now we're going to give is this a question, or is it a statement, or what is it? Jenny can be the judge, you can be the judge. Because it can be all of them, of this ongoing quest for, oops, a bit of a spit, for the standing leg. So what I'm going to do, having looked, is apply a gravity stimulation to the leg. So I'm going to pretend to be gravity and see what the response is in the person. See if they feel, whether I feel that there's a level of organisation going up through them or not. So just like you were gravity pushing down through around T1, down into the foot, you were adding to gravity. Now I'm pretending to be gravity from up here. My hand's on the foot. And the way I'm going to do it is to make a bit of a stirrup thing, and like this, and I'm going to be on this heel bone, which is a really long bone. And as you can see from here, this heel bone is right under the shin. So if I push here, I'm just going to flex their foot. If I push in the midfoot, I'm still going to flex their foot. But if I'm on just in front of the heel, so I'm not on the heel, but it's not still on the heel bone, because it's got a long bit in front. And I'm going to nestle the web of my hand here, and I'm going to push. And it's going to go straight up the leg into that roof of the acetabulum. He gets a bit of side bending of the pelvis, but then it goes up into his head. And then I could come back again. So I'm being gravity, and I'm seeing what is his response. So his first response is so I'm closing the gap in the ankle joint a little bit here. I'm closing the gap in the knee joint a little bit. Then I'm closing the gap in the top of the hip joint. And then the very first thing he does is the pelvis side tilts. Yes, can you see that? If I keep going, side tilts, and then if I keep going, if I go slowly enough, it keeps side tilting, but already there's a bit of the force is now being transmitted in up through the spine, and the head is sliding, so he's sliding up that way. See that? So it won't be as clear as that on other people, and you won't push as hard, but that's the sequence of events that you'll, and again, you're going to fake it feeling that the ankle joint closes up and the knee joint, but you're going to go so slowly that you could pretend that you can feel it. Is that sort of clear? Both. You can both pretend. This is a game of pretend. Now, for me to generate a force like that, the answer is the pelvis for me. So I have to line myself up so that this movement, where does that come from? Oh, elderly citizen movement. That's actually the movement that I'm doing. But it's quite small, but that's where my force is coming from. So it's actually coming from my feet, generated from the ground, through my pelvis, up through my stick-like back, into the stirrup of my hand. So it's not this, because that's my arm, and I'm going to get really tired. And he'll feel it. You'll feel you can do it. You know, do it with just your arm, as opposed to getting down low. So what I'm trying to do, if I'm thinking that the source of my power is my pelvis, I want the pelvis to be lined up somewhere so that the force from my pelvis to here has as fewer angles to get through as possible. So I'm not going to do it like this. I'm not going to do it like this. I'm not going to do it from up here. Can you see that my skeleton is connected to my pelvis in a line that's congruent with where I want to go? That there's no kind of major angles of difference. Does that make sense? So that all I have to do is lean, and you can see my right knee is coming a little bit more forward. And there's nothing happening in my shoulder and my elbow aren't doing anything much in particular other than staying there. And it's all from my pelvis. Yeah. Staying relatively, it's not going backwards. I mean, I'm on a whizzy stool, so Lord knows what's happening. But, and it's incredibly powerful and incredibly efficient for me. Right, so my FI experience, I'm doing an FI on myself in terms of getting myself organised to be as efficient as I can to give them the experience of that. So feel free to this is, take a lifetime to get that happening. Now to do it on this side, so I am right-handed, so I've had to practice this a lot to be as equal as I can with my left hand as my right hand. And who knows whether I have achieved that or not. I'm going to try. I'm going to have a little crack. So again, I'm lining up my sense of, so that if I transmit my weight into my left hip joint, it goes into his left. Now it just so happens that it's my left hip joint and his left hip joint. That's serendipity, but you get the idea. My pelvis is my power source. Now I'm a bit of a leaner, and I am quite naughty at putting my elbows on my knee. It works very well for me because then as soon as I move my knee, it moves my elbow. But it does mean that because I wear black trousers, I always have this little patch of white skin, dead skin on my trousers. You don't have to lean. You cannot lean. I don't have to lean. I can do it here, but I just organise well around leaning. So one of the trainers used to call me Eileen. Get it? Come on, Eileen. Anyway, so here we go. And again, I'm thinking, I'm on the calcaneum, on its heel bone, and I'm thinking close this joint, close the knee joint, close the hip joint, and then I'm already bang in his pelvis. And he side bends here too in a slightly different way. But yes, so there's a lot more side bending, and now he's sliding. Now it's going up into his spine and in his head, and you can hear him sliding up. But see how much side bending. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So what am I feeling for here? I'm getting a sense, well, what connects, what's this kind of qualitative difference, like when you're pushing down, that I felt like I was really pushing down through the skeleton without any too much crumpling on the left versus the right yesterday. And now I'm doing the opposite, pushing from the right, the left foot and the right foot up. And again, seeing how much relative crumpling or connection. So the crumpling versus the connectedness. You know, how cleanly does the force transmit piece by piece by piece, almost as if you're pushing to the top of the head. So what's my ideal is that there's no crumpling and it just goes, like if I push both sides, it's pretty much, there's almost no crumpling anywhere. There's a little bit of, see how his pelvis tilts a little bit backwards first, but then it pretty much goes straight. Whereas with one leg, now if he was, so we have a bit of an ideal, but don't hang on to it too much. And now, see this one, what I did was corrected it, so to speak, to being more upright. And then, of course, it connects quite well. If I pushed where it was, where he had it, still, because he's a stick, it still does transmit. However, for your person, you can try push where their leg is, push where it looks more like it's a standing leg. So for this one, it's pushing there, and this one it's pushing there. And just play around a little bit then with the angle of the whole leg and which angle gives you what kind of connectivity. Is that clear enough? You might push there.